So I am calling to order our board workshop for Monday, February 13th. We have a board workshop on board 5-year master facilities and planning from 4 to 6. So I am welcome everyone. This is probably the first of many, well, it's not necessarily the first, but the first for this group of many conversations relating to our district-wide facilities. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Ross to give an overview and to discuss the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We are gathered to begin, as our chair says, one of many conversations that we'll have regarding the 5-year Master Facilities Planning Workshop. I did want to do a video just to kind of overview, and I do have my staff here. I'm going to spend the bulk of today hearing your discussions and deliberations around 7 questions under 4 different categories. We believe that today is not about making any formal decision, but by intaking information, hearing your questions, getting comments, getting your feedback initial, and that we can go back and continue to research. So as we shared in our last meeting, the administrative agenda for this year has a lot of different things that kind of interweave back and forth, but the 5-year master facility plan guides a lot of this. And so our overall goal is to create a prioritized list of these capital projects that will be approved by this body. And so what are those key questions? They're under 4 different headings. The first one is to define the minimum conditions of all of our facilities. And we know that we can't answer this until we have our A&E team, our architectural and engineering firm on the ground. We look to bring that to you either at the end of this month or the beginning of the next month for approval. But we want to talk about today just what some of the considerations we would like to share with the A&E team. But the next one, grade structure, questions 2 and 3, that's I think only this body can answer. How will we organize our district, and what's the philosophy for redistricting and rezoning? We want to make sure that we give an A&E team that direction before they begin. Question number 3 is about enrollment analysis and projections for each school. Again, this we will get continual feedback from our team at a later date. The purpose, we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing instructionally for each of our schools. It's what does education look like 5 years from now, and then how do we plan beginning with the end in mind, as you used to say, so to speak. What's that overall purpose? And then the last theme is utilization rate. That's something I really need the board's direction from. I've talked to other superintendents. While there's not necessarily policy, there is the board direction on what are we going to talk about in terms of capacity. How are we going to utilize that? I will admit that we talk about maximum capacity, and I think it is also prevalent to talk about minimums as well. At what point do you look at closing the school? So these capacity pieces are things that we want to just begin a discussion with today. Again, no answer needs to be made at this meeting on the following board meeting, but we thank you for beginning the discussion. I think before we begin, just for the public's understanding, there's some key definitions that sometimes is interchangeably used, and I understand that, but when we're talking about conditions of the building, previously we have, and it's in your packet, the 2019 MBCON report. That used a rating system of excellent, good, fair, and poor. We will be proposing a new conditions rating system, so we don't have that yet. Core capacity, that's an important number, as that's what I call the fire marshal number, how many students you can put in their place. Program capacity is determined by the instructional programs. We're going to talk about ADA, which is the attendance, ADM, which is the pupil weight, and then a number that I think the community is used to, which is head count or enrollment, how many students are in the building. Now, every day these numbers change. Every day these numbers change. So to make decisions, we typically use the 45th day and the 135th day numbers. That just keeps things apples to apples. But every day these numbers change. 135th, we set the budget. 45th day, we adjust the budget. And then gross square footage. Gross square footage is the internal heating and cooling plan. It does not include our roof footage. So we have about 2.8 million total square foot of heating and cooling space, but we have acreage, we have roof lines, external buildings that we maintain. So with that, in terms of defining the minimum conditions, this was our old system that we've used on 2019 MBCon. What I'm going to ask just very briefly, as we discuss this in your packet, we have what we're proposing to include in the new rating system. And so I'm going to ask this time our Director of Operations, Mr. Dave Wiseman, just explain just the parts that we have in this, in our defining minimum conditions, how we are proposing to work with the A&E team on this. Yes, that way we can.
We've done a little research, and like I said, we looked at MBCon and we've gone back as far as we could. And it's really hard from those studies to determine what's actually needed. Our best guess is that their conditions or their rating was based on the cost it would to improve that building. How's that? But it's based on the cost of what it would cost to bring that building up to code. So we wanted something a little bit more definitive. You know, the roof line, fixing the roof line, repairing the roof line, and the cost may not cost as much as restructuring the floor space on the inside or fixing the HVAC systems. So we're trying to come up with a rating system that covers each area independently, assign it a value, and then in a sense total those values up to say, well, this particular building has the structural work that needs to be done, some electrical, plumbing. So, you know, they get 2 and 3 points respectively. So now they're at 5, whereas another building has 6 other things that are wrong with it. So that might bring it up to a point where we have to look at it as an 8 and then address that specifically to the square footage size. Like I say, you fix a roof on a smaller school, it's not going to cost as much. If you fix it on a high school, it's going to cost a little bit more money. So we're trying to get into the infrastructure and the building codes of the facility so we better understand in detail what each facility needs, and we can bring that back to the board and talk about what our options are.
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, just wanted to, before we move on to the next part, just hear your initial concerns about what we've included in defining minimum conditions.
Ms. Huddle has a
So we can ask questions?
Should we ask as we go? Yeah.
Okay. So one question I had is, environmental quality is under health and well-being, and while it's related, I didn't see energy efficiency on here anywhere. Should we consider that?
That would fall under the mechanical aspect of the HVAC systems and the infrastructure. So we might need to list specifically, say under mechanical, what that all includes. We can do that so that there's a better understanding. It includes HVACs and in some cases the electrical systems that are not specifically related to the school, the football fields and stuff like that. So we might need to go in a little bit more detail with that. We can do that.
And I have a question. When we talk about this new rating system, do we have models of how this rating system has been used for other schools?
Actually, I do.
Okay, I'm just curious because that would be interesting to see a completed model and how they were able to utilize.
This
How that
particular
model works.
district that we kind of build a lot of this off of has a plan all the way to 2035.
Okay, that would be, do they have like could you point that to where we could do independent research at some point? Okay,
We've talked to, this was in Greenville. A lot of this was taken from Greenville Public Schools.
okay.
They have theirs going out, what did you say, 10 years or
12 years right now.
12
I think.
years? And one of the things that they said is they did kind of just what we're doing now. They have some subcommittees, but the A&E team will have its philosophy. We will add ours and kind of come up with a mutual grading scale. And so then what they would do is that number you can itemize based on what we have here. I think when we have our next round of discussions, we need to talk about weighting.
Waiting.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So, of course, air quality or ADA is going to be a higher weight than some other things, technology. So, but that's one that we've kind of looked at, talked to Superintendent Burke Roster about his, and he said it was kind of a give and take on coming up with their complete one. But to your question, that's something you can look at independently and just see how that works out.
And so when we do this new rating system, are we just throwing out the MBCon study?
I think instead of throwing it out, giving it as a baseline, but I think starting from scratch, assessing all of our buildings gives this new team kind of their own independent study of these. So they'll have it as kind of a baseline, but I think from them starting from scratch, using their own would encompass everything we've seen from 2019. Plus, all pricing at this point is just
Totally different.
yes,
So,
totally
yeah.
different. Yeah.
Mr. Satterfield, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Was in this rating system, will there be any other things maybe included like, I know that we're going to talk about classroom size and such, and a maximum and a minimum, so to speak, but as it relates to how instructional changes have been with regards to the furniture, and I'm guessing that a lot of some of the classrooms, at least of the schools that I visited, in comparison, some of the classrooms are rather small in size, and our kids are getting bigger. I was at Irmo, and so the kids were walking down this very narrow hall, and when I worked at Dutch Fork High School, I noticed the halls and sections were quite narrow too. And the other thing is usable space when it comes to like cafeteria, and even, and I know that I had this discussion with Mr. Ross a while back about location of certain offices and things like admin offices with security. Some of them are, the tendency years ago was to put all your admin officers or all your admin team close to the front of the school. And when I visited Dutch Fork Elementary School, they had their assistant principals sitting in the halls and student desks because that's where they needed to be. So we might, I don't know if that belongs here, but when it comes to rating facilities, operational and instructional, again, with making sure that the sizes are correct and the restrooms and things like that might be.
We're looking at a couple things. You mentioned cafeteria. We've got our cafeteria coordinator. We've gone through the schools. The food line today is much different than when they built the school. So if you move one of the serving lines, that's going to mess up your plumbing and your electricity. So we were talking about the height of students now and the sneeze guard. And, they're a little bit shorter in some cases, but when the cafeteria staff is handing them the food, and then it may not make a difference. So we're trying to drill down into those weeds as best we can. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
All right, Dr. Ross, go ahead.
Any other discussion on minimum conditions? Yes, sir.
You guys might have talked about it or ran outside, so I apologize if I repeat myself. On the rating basis you guys are going to be using, is like, for example, is the rating for plumbing weighed just as heavily as the rating for passive and active security, right? Is this rating basis, does one have a,
Bigger weight, yeah.
like a higher weight value?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that we will end up coming back, we would like to take this feedback to our A&E team and just talk about weightings, right? Because, of course, an ADA or building code compliance issue has to be a very higher weight than a technology issue. But then you have the instructional program weight in terms of purpose. And so how that comes into the rating system is going to be something that's going to take a lot of discussion. What was interesting about these pieces is building to building, you can almost come up with past basic codes, but you can come up with a kind of a flat system of here's a school that we need to address right now. And I think we heard some concerns at the parent advisory meeting about some infrastructure things with plumbing. We just want to make sure at a base level, before we get into classrooms or programs or technology, that those base pieces are covered. So I think when conditioned, it will be the basically infrastructure, security, and health and wellness is air quality, mold, things of that nature. How those are weighted, I think we're going to lean to them to help us with that. All right, Madam Chair. All right. So we're going to move on to question 2, and this is grade structure. So what you see here on the screen is our current grade structure. We have counted 9 different grade structures within our current system. We are working very hard to educate children in this system, but I do not believe it's the best. We have 3K, 4K programs. We have K through 4 programs. We have K through 5 programs. We have 5, 6 programs, 6 programs. We have 6th, 7th, and 8th programs. We have 8, 9, and 10 so I can go over all of them, but and then you can see the flow of students through our district. And so this is our current setup. Before we go over movement of students in terms of zoning and rezoning, it's important to establish a structure or a grade structure first. So what the administration proposes is a 5-level grade structure for District 5. So at level 1 would be early childhood. As you know, we have 3 and 4K programs. The reason behind this grade structure, and I think we talked a little bit about, there was a time where 9th grade was more junior high school, and how schools were set up based on development, right? And then you had curriculum needs that started to move students. So there is research that will support a variety of different grade structures. There's research on K-8, there's research on K-12. There's a lot so you can find research to support whatever grade structure. This one will allow us to maximize efficiencies in our current grade structure moving to this one. So staffing, program implementations and deployments of equipment, certifications and movement of different programs, special ed needs. We could flatten and come up with a lot of efficiencies, not so much, it would be getting lean, but it would be getting getting much more effective with our staffing and resources. So on early childhood, I think a lot of times people think, well, you don't have to have 3K. Well, with BabyNet, we get a notice 90 days, 60 days, 30 days out of children that we have to educate through BabyNet. So, and these are students with special needs and things. And so we do offer 3K, and we have programs that are paid. So we cover those. Level 2 would be elementary. It's the administration's proposal to have all elementaries K-5. Level 3 would be middle. It's the administration's proposal to have all middle schools 6th through 8th grade. We don't know what to do to high school, the ninth graders, so we're going to leave them in. I'm joking. We're going to leave them in the high school at 9 and 12, and that's very unique grade because you have students who need additional help in the gap, but you also have students who are ready to take college classes, right? And so you've seen research on ninth grade academies and those. I would like each high school and their principal to structure how they need it for their particular school. The ninth grade in high school model is one we're proposing. And then we would have our level 5 would be district-wide, our district-wide programs. We're proposing Academy for Success, Adult Ed, Center for Advanced Technical Studies, and the 5 program. So like to open it up for discussion and about, again, we're not asking for a decision today, but other considerations that we might not have included in this proposed grade structure.
And I guess I got to turn my little green light on when I speak. Do we currently have 3 and 4K in all 3 clusters?
Dr. Harris?
We do have for 4K, we do have in all clusters, yes. There are 16 classes in 11 of our different elementary age schools. And then there are fewer 3K students throughout our district as well.
Are most of our 3 and 4K located in the Title I schools, or are they just throughout the district?
They're throughout the district.
Okay. I did have another comment as this relates back to instructional programs, since you've got instructional program there. I really feel the one thing that I've seen throughout the years with all the adjustments with schools and moving groups here and trying to make modifications and accommodating those students is it really hurts the instructional programs, because in the past and years ago, what the ideal model for teachers and schools is to have a lot of collaboration. When students leave elementary school, they can collaborate with those teachers that they know are going to be going to the middle school. And subsequently, the same way going from 8th to 9th grade. We used to have meetings with those teachers, and they would talk about those students who needed extra help and how to best place those kids, and about programmatic issues. If students were coming in and they were struggling, a group in particular subject areas, then they could modify or change their instruction to help. So it would be of great assistance to teachers and students if we can come up with a clean system like that. Again, I visited Crossroads, and they are all 6th grade, and they get a whole new crew every year, and they're going all over the place. So I am very much in favor of that model that is very clean and really provides more assistance for it. And I think it would help with teacher retention too. So
I agree with you. Ms. Huddle, did you have?
I was just gonna, I guess, ask, I know we've got a full slate, but there's a couple things that are very much related to this, but I don't see them really addressed separately, and that is choice and magnet. So, I mean, I, for one, would kind of like to understand what you guys recommend, like, you know, is there a path through magnet as well? Does that correspond? And then on choice, kind of the same thing. I think some of the other board members have gotten some of the same emails I have. You get a parent who puts their child in elementary school for choice, and the middle school that follows that elementary school is not available for choice. And then you get the email, I can't get my son or daughter into that school. And I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, but I almost feel like they were set up for I shouldn't say failure, but, you know, so those are two things I'd kind of like to not digress here, but maybe look at as well next time is the administration's recommendations on choice and magnet.
Amen. I think one of the things that we will do is when we design this, we said if we were building the district from scratch, how would we build it from scratch? And then we have to now attack the realities on the ground. So what I'd like to do is if we build it with this grade structure, then we're going to zone into this grade structure. When we zone into this grade structure, then we design choice behind that zoning plan. So it's grade structure, zoning, choice and matters. And as we handle it, because, you know, what Mr. Satterfield was sharing was the vertical articulation that exists in Chapin, right? You could go back and look at, in fact, we were playing classes like that. You could look at your fourth grade at the elementary school and plan how many math teachers you needed in middle school. And then you could look at sixth grade or seventh grade in middle school, and you can plan how many math teachers you need in ninth grade. That vertical articulation let us know how to better prepare to meet the challenges. But what I think is the horse in front of the cart is the grade structure. Then we zone into that grade structure. It may reflatten things, and then we choice into that. And that way, families are looking at more, all right, where am I going to put my child K-12 versus this one play elementary, right?
So I have a question kind of related to that, kind of going back towards, you know, reformulating how we do the next district-wide facilities need assessment. You know, if we're going to a new grading format and looking at all of our schools, and then we look at the way that the current grade structure is, and we look at our current elementary schools, and you see that the Dutch Fork cluster and the Irmo cluster, they have more elementary schools than the Chapin cluster, but you see the growth in Chapin exploding. And an example of that, of how we've struggled as a district to address that is, you know, like Lake Murray, everyone knows that Lake Murray has been overcrowded for years. And even with building a new elementary school, and there's a lot of things that go into all of this, but take all of that away. Now we have 3 elementary schools in Chapin. We still have 2 that are pretty close to capacity, if not over capacity, struggling with over enrollment in just 3 elementary schools. And then we look at the other clusters and their enrollment numbers are lower. And so if we take all of that into account, and then we look at how we're thinking about restructuring the grade levels across the district, and we look at how we're assessing where every school is right now. You take all of those components together, and I'm going to say the word that I know a lot of people give a lot of people a heart attack, but like, when do we start talking about consolidating elementary schools? And when that is smart. And I mean, I think any change is difficult for anyone in any situation, but are those conversations that we're having as we develop this new grading structure of, instead of a poor or instead of a 1, it's, hey, we have these 2 schools, tear them both down, and we have a bigger elementary school that, I mean, you could put 2 elementary schools in Irmo and that would be the size of Lake Murray. And they are both in poor condition, so as we build a brand new structure, it is, I mean, we're taking into account the future and what those needs may be in the future. Like I said, I know that that's not always a popular, I mean, because we're going to have to start talking about rezoning. And what I don't want to do is have to rezone a bunch of times, because that is very frustrating to families as they decide where they want to live. So as we talk about rezoning, it would be nice to know, well, hey, well, we might have a brand new school that will eliminate 2 schools or 3 schools, and I'm just saying, I'm throwing out numbers. So, but what are your thoughts on that, and how is that being taken into account?
I think what's going to happen is once we decide on grade structure, we're going to present multiple rezoning plans to you. But part of that is looking at, in terms of, as you said, what are the conditions of it? And so when we start putting prices to these projects, I think that's where we're going to have just another element of, all right, what can we actually do? And at the end of this process, we're going to talk about the financing of this plan. With unlimited resources, we can do a lot. It's going to come down to, all right, what can we do with the pricing options that we have? and we might not want to do that, but based on, you know, the resources at hand, here are our options. So I think where does the notion of adding buildings, consolidating, I think once we get the results back from the minimum condition survey, the ratings, and then when we start to talk about our usage of the building, what's our desired utilization rate? One of the things that we're going to share is we have to really think different now on how we talk about the head count. The public wants to hear head count. So 100 students divided by 25. I want to tell you that is not the way to look at it. We have to look at ADM. I came out of the classroom, it was 9 students. We needed 3 teachers in there for 9 students just because of the needs that are there. So I think all of that together will give us a better picture of on that final plan.
And let me just add this. Again, having worked in all 3 clusters, everything is so different. Some schools are very consistent with their enrollment and they just add more. Some schools have as much as a 35 and 40% turnover every year. And so it makes it very difficult to project your numbers. I mean, you can kind of look at the history and try to do your best, but in those schools, and we have more than one that's that way, we have several that have a huge turnover ratio. And this gets back to the instructional process or considerations, and that is a lot of these are schools of poverty. And so while you have a minimum or a maximum, you have to be able to think outside the box in order to educate those students. You've got students that are coming in to 5th grade with a 2nd grade level of education. That's just the reality of things. You can't put your head in the sand and say, well, you know, they get on the bus and they should be able to learn. It just doesn't work that way. So all those things are things that will be taken into consideration. But I do like the idea of not limiting ourselves, but saying, all right, what would we like to have? And then sort of from there, look at what our resources are. And then kind of like with the principals used to gather in a big room and talk about capital, and everybody had their list. And then you just have to start whittling away. Oh, Matt, yours is far more important than mine. I'm embarrassed to even bring mine up now. So that's sort of the process you go through. But there are a lot of considerations. And so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Kind of piggybacking on Ms. Hines' question and comment, is there a minimum size school in terms of efficiency or ability to offer a breadth of levels and that kind of stuff? So, and at the same time, is there a maximum? You know, so, you know, you don't have to answer that question, that what it is, but, you know, maybe we need that recommendation too, that we don't think we can affect, and it may differ, like an elementary school can obviously be smaller than a high school, but that would be good to hear too from an educational perspective, what you guys think as far as how small is too small and how big is too big.
And that's a good point. We have a survey that we're developing with our principals just to kind of get an idea of that and kind of looking at research. And I think, too, it's going to be based on programmatic size. And we want to be very clear with the public. Programmatic capacity is based on, you know, kind of our interpretation. It's not a hard line. I mean, sometimes there are limiting factors like, for instance, if you're Title I, it's going to say, you have to build these classrooms at 18 versus 22, or board policy. There are special education parameters, but then, so we would like to, I think, take that as a note and a revisement and bring that back.
So with the proposed grade structure, kind of, for those that weren't involved or active with the community or the district around the time that the change went to the intermediate model, can you kind of walk us through those decisions that were made around that time? And well, we've heard some negatives about it, but I mean, there's positives with that intermediate side.
Dr. Harris, do you know the history on the intermediate model and how we got to that? I think Crossroads and Chapin Intermediate. Oh, okay.
Well, and I guess I
Yeah,
look at it, like my
yeah.
time coming through this district,
Right.
right, as an '01 graduate, middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th, right? And that
Right.
was always the
Yeah.
structure of school, to my knowledge of education. At some point, from the time I went off to college to the time I came back, to the time I started paying attention, now we've got a 6th and 7th grade, or 5th and 6th at one cluster, and we've got a 6th at the other. Sorry, thank
It's
you.
funny, like we're talking to each other, we gotta, yeah.
So I guess if we don't have it now, I understand, but as we
I think that's
come to
im-
make these decisions, if we could maybe have some more understanding as to what decisions were made to bring that model into the existence of
That's right.
D5
That's right.
when it did,
That's right.
and kind of see how that stacks up to the needs of today.
And it goes back, I think, I would like that. When you arrive at D5, you hear these stories of Campus I and Campus R. And I know they were trying to spell Irmo, but I don't know where M and O is. Oh, okay. It never. And I think a lot of it might have been reactions to growth surges. And versus this is an instructional model that we're trying to deliver. So we can go back and kind of pull the history, but you can tell how long someone's lived in our community if they drive past Crossroads and they say, that's Campus I. It's like, oh, you've been here for a while.
Let me just add, I'll just give you a little bit of the history that I remember, Matt. And that was, again, when I was at Campus I, there was supposed to be an IR M&O because Irma was in the Big 16 in the state. When you were there, they were probably Big 16. You remember that. And so the growth was huge. It was Irmo and it was Chapin. That was it. And Chapin was a little two-way school. When they built Dutch Fork High School, originally they had something called the middle school model that everybody in the country was following. I think it came out of Colorado or somewhere at a big conference there. It's called the middle school model, and they changed the way they did instruction. They incorporated a lot of clubs, and it was a way to help middle school kids. So if you ever work in a middle school, you'll understand what I'm saying. Get through that process. My recollection, because I helped open Chapin Middle School, it was simply an enrollment necessity when they decided to add the middle school, because in the old days, elementary school was up to 6th grade. And remember, I went to junior high school.
Me too.
You did too?
Me too.
You're not that old, miss. But so that was just 7th and 8th. So I'm pretty sure that it was born out of necessity and a way to deal with, and that's probably how we got to this crazy situation we got now. So I would love to see us get back to a more solid, fluid plan,
Yeah, likewise. I just didn't know if there was, some academic secret I'm missing out on.
I mean, it was just a comment kind of based off what Mr. Hogan said. I can see where there might have been at one time the necessity to have it and where you could find those good things in it, but it seems over the years it's been a little bit difficult. I know in the transition period going from 5th grade and then having a change and going to 6th grade and then having a change and going to 7th grade. And I know 6th, 7th, and 8th, we all remember middle school. That was, hard as a 6th grader being around 8th graders, but I can also see where that so many transitions in so much of a short period of time can be kind of difficult too, so.
That's a very good point about transitions. That's some of the advocates of a K-8 model will tell you one of the reasons that they value the K-8 model is because it's less transitions, and I think Chapin High was that K-8.
When I first started teaching, Chapin Elementary was K through 7, and the high school was 8 through 12.
8 through 12, okay. That's right, 8 through 12. So, and you can see in our current model, when we talk about transitions, you're taking 10 elementary school communities and moving them into one school. And, our district teacher of the year is from Crossroads. But what we're asking that community to do is by this time of the year, you're just learning the students, and you're just kind of making those connections, and they're getting ready to transition out. So I think this model helps us. We limit the transitions, have that consistency in terms of staffing, certification, movement of resources, allocation of our personnel, and then programmatically we get better learning, and then also it helps us with our vertical articulation as well. All right. So now, when we were asked the board to make it wouldn't be a policy, but a formal declaration at some point of whatever the grade structure is. So I know you want to go back to your the community and constituents and hear more feedback. But once this is adopted, then we would like to zone or rezone or redistrict into this grade structure using our existing buildings, looking at it, how would that look like with our.
So you're saying prior to any building programs or anything, you just want to go ahead and transition?
I would, yes. So that if we look 5 years ahead, if you adopt this as the district grading structure, then we would use this to present a redistricting plan.
You started to take a breath. So what would you do with situations like? Thank you. What would you do with situations like Chapin Intermediate and Chapin Middle School?
Very next slide. So what we want to do is talk about what do we do in our current facilities if we are to move into that redistricting model. So I think before we start, I think to Mr. Hogan's point, it's good to go over the histories of things. Where do we come from? How did we get to where we are? And then we'll talk about moving forward from there. So I asked Dr. Harris to go deep into the history, all the way back to 2018, to help us understand how we have our current zoning plan, and then we want to show you our proposed plan. So Dr. Harris?
Thank you. And 2018 does sound like it was a long time ago in a lot of ways. And I will confess that I have violated the rules of PowerPoint, as I shared with Ms. White earlier, that I have a lot of verbiage on here. But I think it's very important that I share this. And so please walk with me as I give just a couple of years of zoning to date. We talked much about Lake Murray Elementary School in particular and the number of students that during that particular time of 2017, 2018, where the students were really tilting toward nearly 1,000 students in that particular school. And so as a result of that, we conferred with and found a model from the Fort Mill School District that they had used several years ago called an enrollment freeze. Brought that concept here, shared it, and in January of 2018, we did what was called phase 1 of an enrollment freeze solely at Lake Murray Elementary School. And what that did was it redirected those students who were new to the area to other schools. We knew at that time that, the district knew at that time that Chapin Elementary School was going to be a very close second. So it was not long thereafter, a year later, that phase 2 was employed with an enrollment freeze for Chapin Elementary School. And again, students who were new to those areas were redirected to other schools in the district. We contracted with a professional services contracting company, a demographer, Milona McBrone Incorporated, to create several scenarios as to what a redistricting would look like. Several scenarios were brought forward to the board at that particular time. However, in November of that particular year, there was a changeover of board. And so in December of 2020, the board approved an amendment. New board at that time approved an amendment to those professional services contract to design additional scenarios. And it was earlier the following month of January, at the top of the year, January 2021, that what was referred to, and I think the record would speak to scenario number 5, was included, was approved by the board, and it also included Old Lexington Highway to be zoned into Chapin Elementary School. Chapin Elementary and Lake Murray continued to be on an enrollment freeze, and the idea and the plan and purpose was that it would continue in that regard until the new Elementary School 13, as it was called at that particular time, was built and opened. January 21, again, scenario 5 was approved, and in March of that same year, just a couple of months later, I came forward, I think even in this room, and presented redistricting exemptions, and also got an approval for Piney Woods to become a school of choice. It was later that year, that's not on the final bullet, it's not on here, but I think it is pretty obvious that in August of 2021, Piney Woods Elementary School was opened. And so that gives you a very quick review. Again, I regret the excessive verbiage, but I think was important to share with you so that we might have a few years of a history of what the rezoning or redistricting here in School District 5 would look like.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. And so what we have with that history, we wanted to look at, all right, how do we move forward? And so what Dr. Harris has placed here is our 45th day and our 90-day data. So that's in your packet to review. You can look at, now we're talking head count at this point. But Dr. Harris, you can go over the next slide for us.
Certainly. So I'll just say a word about these two, and I
I'm
appreciate
sorry.
we do have the 45th, the final, and the 90th day, which you all have received by way of board packets earlier. Again, these are snapshots, and it's reflective of, these snapshots are reflective of what we heard earlier in this workshop of what we call milestone dates throughout the course of the year, the 10th, 45th, 90th, 135th, and 180th day of school. The point to take in reference to the milestones in these 45th and 90th day is that these are based on head count, snapshots on a given day, and it includes both funded and unfunded students, regardless of funding status, in other words. And if you see at the bottom, it's in small print, but it is there on the left-hand side as I face the screen. It does indicate that all students registered in Power School on day 45 are included in this report, regardless of the funding source. So I wanted to share that with you. And one of the things that I think is so important about the enrollment, as we've talked about growth in the Chapin area, I'll just simply highlight this one point here, and that is if we look at the intermediate and the middle school, if you look at that, that really suggests to us that on the 45th, and it is consistent on the 90th day, which is our next page, that there are at least approximately about 500 students, each grade level, who are moving forward into the high school. That has given us pause and given us cause to have great concern and want to give further consideration to that area where the growth continues to occur. Again, that's the 90th day, which is also included. I'll simply say to you that what we've seen from our 45th to 90th day has been what I refer to as stable and consistent growth. And what we anticipate in terms of the 135th is yet one and the same, like stable, consistent. We maintain essentially what we have received in terms of throughout the course of the year. Our greatest measure of growth was about the start of the year during our 10th day of enrollment, and again, it has been pretty steady throughout the course until current day. The greatest adjustments here from the 45th to the 90th day was what the enrollment that occurred in our 5 program. The final thing I'll share with you is this, that these are important. This information is important for us as we do include school of choice options as students move back and forth, as well as magnet programs as students move back and forth and enroll throughout the highest grade levels. This is important for our human resources department as well as our finance as we look at next steps in terms of hiring, in terms of the staffing and teacher-student ratios, and in terms of any financing that occurs as well. So I would conclude on that particular note.
Can I ask a question real fast? Just something that I just noticed, and I hope I'm not opening a can of worms, but it might be totally unrelated, and it may just be based off of the years. But I see as we look at the 4 different high schools and we look at the 9th grade, their numbers in the 9th grade seem to be a lot higher than the numbers in the 12th grade. Is that just because there were more babies born in those years and like certain grades are, well, I mean, you know, you hear like certain years there's like population booms and then, or is that because, you know, there's a trend of folks moving in high school, or
I think.
I don't want to talk about like graduation rates necessarily. I mean, but like, is that a trend? Is that what that is reflecting, or?
I don't know that for that
Okay.
particular grade level.
And it
However,
might just be right now. So
I will say that that is something that we do watch
Okay.
but I can't speak to that grade level at this particular
okay,
time. But
I just saw
we do
that
look at those
difference
con-
at
make those
every
considerations.
school. So yep.
And you will typically see, while we don't have the data to support it, like Dr. Harris says, your ninth grade is always going to be bigger because you have the retention, and that's why you've seen, like, when High Schools at Work was launched, ninth grade academies and things of that nature to help with that ninth grade retention issue. It is a tough transition, just like coming into sixth grade or coming into middle school is a tough transition. That ninth grade year has been tough, and so there are factors where a lot of our students did not receive the 6 credits necessarily needed to become a power school 10th grader. So their second year in the building, but they still count as a ninth grader on this enrollment count. So you'll see that smaller 10th grade, sometimes that reflects a second year student with ninth grade status. And then the same thing with 11th and 12th grade. And so our goal with college and career readiness and graduation rates to what this is to look at students about what's called the 9GR. That is your stamp of where exactly are you supposed to be. So 18th in the 10th grade, you're off track. So a lot of some of this data will be other things like Dr. Harris says that we don't have, but a lot of times you'll see it as we call it ninth grade repeaters or off track students.
Actually, kind of a related question. We have a jump of over 200 kids from 8th grade to 9th grade. And so the question I have is, and maybe you guys could show us for the last few years, where's that jump coming from? Has there been a fall off in birth rates or whatever? Because, if you look at this and you assume that these first graders are going to go all the way through, then that means instead of 1,600 ninth graders, in a few years we're only going to have 1,300. Or is it people moving into the district? And if it would be good to know kind of the numbers for the last 3 or 4 years, is where's that increase coming from? Were these all 8th graders that it was just this huge ninth grade class, or are we getting 200 people moving into the district in the ninth grade?
Yeah, that's something we need to research. That's a great point.
I can tell you it's pretty common when people are relocating and moving, they look for those periods when it least affects their kids. Or they'll stick it out and live another year, get 8th grade, and then they'll move at the beginning of their high school year. So that is consideration that a lot of parents get. It was not unusual to get an influx of kids in 9th grade. And then you have kids that drop out of school later in their senior year or the end of their junior year or whatever. So, but yeah, moving does affect them, that's for sure. I think one of the things that stuck out for me was the Chapin middle numbers at their, and then the moving into 9th grade. It's going to really, that's a big crowd, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's a very big crowd, and we're going to talk about how there's an imminent decision that we need to make because of that. But going through this process helps us make more sustainable decisions and situational. But seeing Chapin High School with 500 freshmen, that's going to be something that we need to prepare for.
Yeah.
So in our current grade structure, this is our zoning plan, and so it's probably easier to look at it with the elementary zone. So we have Piney Woods in its zone here. This is the Chapin Elementary Zone, followed by Lake Murray, Ballin Ballantyne, Oak Point, River Springs. Was interesting, looking at density of houses, and so the zone may look small, but the amount of rooftops in this area, can mirror what you see in this particular area. But our community is changing. Dutch Fork Elementary, H.E. Corley, Irmo, Nursery Road, Harbison West, Lee Park, and Seven Oaks. So this is our current rezoning plan. If we adopt the new grading model, to Ms. Hines' point, we would almost commandeer Ballantyne into the Chapin Elementary cluster. And so what that would look like is a plan like this, where in this current model, and this gets to Mr. Satterfield's point, we'll start on level 1. We're proposing that our early childhood programs stay in their current places, so Chapin Elementary, Dutch Fork Elementary, H.E. Corley, Harbison West, Irmo Elementary, and River Springs. I do want to give a heads up because of the amount of need for early childhood that we see based on poverty, right? So what we have to address in poverty. We have been considering expanding early childhood in the Harbison area. So while we have it here, we do want to have further talks about what a bigger early childhood center would look like in that area. On the elementary level, K-5, we would propose that we zone this current enrollment into, excuse me, Chapin Elementary and Piney Woods Elementary going to a Chapin Middle. That Chapin Middle would be the current Chapin Intermediate School, which was Chapin Middle, right? Ballantyne Elementary and Lake Murray Elementary going into Spring Hill Middle. Now, that cannot be named Spring Hill Middle without the board's approval. It's just a name holder. We're not saying that's what it would be, or that's what it is, but that's just a placeholder. That is the current Chapin Middle School. H.E. Corley, Dutch Fork Elementary, River Springs Elementary, and Oak Point Elementary would move into Dutch Fork Middle as it currently does. And I want to go back to this slide here to explain the Crossroads Middle and Irmo Middle plan. If we look at our map, we would like to, if I start here, this area of Seven Oaks, Lee Park, and this area above the highway of Harbison West, that area would go to a Crossroads Middle. This is theoretical, right? So we have to give it to the demographers, this area, and that area. And then what would happen is below the highway, in this, below the highway, in that area, Nursery Road and Irmo would go to Irmo Middle. When we look at our areas of poverty, our need, our resources, and the size of our middle school, if you look at the size of Irmo Middle School right now, and just kind of what we concentrate in that area, I think it's better to do a more community model. Again, I feel like we would gain a lot of utility in services and kind of consolidating. We don't want to get in a situation where we're doing interventions like Nest at every school. That's unsustainable. But if we're looking at community needs and that vertical articulation, I think we could best meet community issues by shortening smaller middle schools and then shortening the service area in which you have for a middle school. So that is a lot to throw at you, so we're gonna pause and, yes.
I have a question. I have two that kind of relate to this. If we were to, I know you said that you're going to bring this back to us, so the way that the process, I'm kind of repeating what you're saying, so in my mind, I can process it. So you're saying that what we need to do is agree on a proposed grading structure. Once we agree on the grading structure, we can discuss rezoning. And then once we discuss rezoning, then we can discuss how we're going to pay for all the things. Okay, so if we agree on like this as our grading structure, this proposed draft right here, can it be implemented tomorrow without, well, and this is kind of theoretical, but can this be implemented without having to find a large pool of money, like talking about a bond or talking about having to completely go into, like, for example, the Chapin Intermediate turning into Chapin Middle School. Right now, that's 2 grades. We would have to turn it into 3 grades. Could we do that? And understanding that there are some facility needs at all of our schools. So, the immediate plans to fix all of that would be very hard to do. But for the short term, because we're just trying to go ahead and get it moving, could this be implemented prior to a bond or prior to reconfiguring our capital budget? How would that work? And then my second question is more Chapin specific to the high school, because we've been talking about Chapin High School, about, it's about to be over capacity based off of this 9th grade class coming in, and we have concerns about portables and things like that. It doesn't seem like this particular model addresses alleviating any overcrowding at Chapin High School. So how does all of that play in?
I would like to handle the
That's a lot of questions. Sorry.
second question first.
Okay.
And that is, does this plan look sustainable for Chapin High School? And that's a very good question. Right now, the Spring Hill model is a magnet. And the ultimate discussion is, when does this line go straight to Spring Hill as a zone school? That is a discussion, I think, that, I feel that in terms of what Spring Hill Magnet has built, it would drastically change what they have built. And so in talking with Dr. Lofton and the hard work and the kind of the model that they have at Spring Hill, we talked about and I'm just going to use the word sub-school within a school at Spring Hill Middle. And the school within the school would mirror exactly what he's doing at Spring Hill High School. So the goal, to Ms. Hines' point, is that if we took between 200, 250 students that were going from Spring Hill straight into Spring Hill Middle from high, then we would relieve Chapin High School without having to zone it. That's the plan, that if they were in the 6th grade and they're in that school within a school, then you could almost plan that they were going to Spring Hill. Now, they still could choose, but that would be the philosophy. And now, it is not the number one driver, but it would give us time to build out an athletic package there. Because price those out, those are $60 to $80 million right now, and you could slowly attack it over the next 5 years. We eventually see a point where that would happen, but I want to signal to Spring Hill that that's not our intent. Our intent is to look what Dr. Lofton and Ms. Huckabee have already talked about with what would a school within a school program at Spring Hill Middle do to alleviate those concerns. So that is something I'm glad you put out on the table. We didn't have it in this presentation, but that's something that is definitely part of the presentation moving forward. And then in order to do that, and that's where we're going to see when we get to the actual prioritized list, it will require removing the Academy for Success out of Spring Hill. In order to make that plan work, we would need that entire wing to do that.
My question is, a school within a school, I know you and I have had that discussion when we worked together. Is this, the school within a school, is it a program like an IB program where anybody can choose to get into school within a school? And, well, I mean, I know you could figure out the numbers, that wouldn't be an issue, but is that something that would pull from other high schools as well? I mean, if you offered it, if it's a magnet school, I mean, is this too early to ask that question, or?
No, what I want to do is what I gave
Or just-
Dr.
if it's just your
Dr.
philosophy,
Lofton he's brilliant. He's smarter than I am. So I've asked him to kind of come up with what that would look like with Ms. Huckabee. But the initial thoughts was that this would not be a magnet school. So this is students from Ballantyne and Lake Murray would flow here. Now, of that population, these two students here, these two schools here, having that program on that school within a school here that would almost be aligned with Spring Hill is the goal.
Know what that school, the definition of that yet.
No, sir.
Hold on, can he answer my other question about the implementation?
Okay, so let me
first?
go to the first question, which is about the implementation timeline. I don't know if that spot is erasing all of my. Oh, that's up there. I got you. Never mind. I'll fight through it. My line disappears when it goes here, but since we're dealing out here, the question is how fast could we get to an implementation of this? We move into the structure, what that's going to do is require some shifting. I want us to focus right here on the Ballantyne area. That's where we're going to see a lot of, issues right here on these lines. Because essentially what we're doing is we're taking Ballantyne Elementary School and we're serving this area with Ballantyne. So this zone will change dramatically to make that happen. We're flattening the entire Chapin Elementary line, so students who live in this area would then be rezoned to Oak Point and to River Springs in order to free this area up, free this school up to bring K to 5 here, and there. Does that make sense? Is that we're not building another school in Chapin. We're commandeering a Dutch Fork Elementary School, but you would be now rezoning students who went to Ballantyne and eventually ended up in Dutch Fork. They would be going to Oak Point, River Springs, maybe H.E. Corley in order to free up Ballantyne. And we're playing with some of these scenarios. We haven't finalized that. So that could disrupt a lot of families and their choices. What we have suggested with any rezoning model is that we have a grandfathering out of our current model into the new one. And that's why we wouldn't recommend like a next year, or this is truly a 5-year plan as you give families that opportunities to grandfather out of it. So that's our initial discussion point on that first question.
You would recommend that we start implementing this next year?
I
Like,
think
when you say next year, do you mean, so we're in 23, so 23, 24? Sorry, the school years are.
right. So I would say that this would be a target within at the end of the 5 years from now that we're into this. At what point one opens, I think I would like a little bit more flexibility on that. But If we zone into that structure, that's taking Ballantyne and essentially expanding these zones to bring Ballantyne into Chapin. And so a lot of the children who go to Ballantyne now would be going to either Oak Point or River Springs. And River Springs has space in it. You can look at, the enrollment versus the size of it. So those students who still go to Dutch Fork High School will continue to go to Dutch Fork High School. It's just that we are actually commandeering Ballantyne into Chapin. That's why I feel like it's not a year one or year two part of the plan right now.
Two questions. This is assuming that this would be our transition,
Our
so to
transition.
speak. So this is not talking about schools like Dutch Fork Elementary that obviously needs replaced or something. They need some help for sure.
So, correct. So this would be the flow that we would take our current setting,
Yeah.
current population, and move into this grade structure. Now, as we look at facility needs, which is a part of this, is one part of the equation. So you got multiple variables of this equation. And that's all right, it's the sun that's moving. But as we look at the different variables of this equation, what we'll find is that, to your point, we may look at, all right, are there schools that need to expand? Are there schools that need to be consolidated? How do we best move into this structure? But we are going to give we want to rezone our current situation into these current buildings in this flow, in this fashion.
So my question to all of this is that you just mentioned this would not be implemented in year one or year two. So we're not just like across the board making this plan, like, I'm trying to articulate we're not just making this happen like say next year or in 2 years where all the schools are going to be zoned like this. We're going to do it in pieces, because that seems like that would be a little bit confusing, especially as people move into our district or move around.
Yeah, what we're in a perfect world, we were building from scratch. It'd be the first thing, everything. What we're anticipating is there are going to be a lot of families that are going to be shifted by this, and so the faster we move with this plan, the more I feel resistance we're going to end up facing with the plan. And we're prepared to deal with it, but I just like providing options. So if we accelerate the plan, which is will require some funding because we have to make some shifts. So I think what the best way to answer your question should be, let's prepare you options on implementation timelines. What a immediate 1 year would look like, and what would that look like over a 5-year implementation? I think that's probably fair to give you those choices, and then let the board review when to implement.
Okay, and are you finished?
Yep.
Ms. Hines?
Go ahead.
And my question is, I see that Harbison West is in both categories there. The decision for their high school attendance along with Crossroads would be based on the map previous map that you showed us with 26?
Correct. So, yeah, it's correct. So currently, all of these students now attend Irmo High School, or zone for Irmo High School. And then the reason that Harbison West is in both areas is based on the density of population that we have here. Mr. Wiseman does the buses, so he knows that. And then we can't put all of this one area into one of those middle schools.
I'm just curious if you knew the numbers according to
per area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have some software that grabs that. I just don't have it with me at this
I
time.
mean, in the end, it may be that you have to not just use 26 as the.
I see. You're correct.
I mean,
yeah.
we don't want to look like a zigzag and
Right.
all over the place, but yeah.
Mr. Scully, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand earlier.
Not really a question, more of a request, but as you're talking, I'm thinking if it's even What would this enrollment chart look like under this plan?
Great question. We will, that's what we want a little time with the A&E team to kind of flush out. And we've been playing with some maps now about how that would look. Here's some considerations that bring us pause that we would like to your point, give you different options. If we went today in our current buildings, it would look one way. If in our prioritized list, let's say we want to put a wing on Lake Murray Elementary, it'll look a different way. Let's say we wanted to consolidate and build a bigger elementary here, it'll look a different way. So I think the best thing, just kind of listening to us talk it through is establish the grade structure, identify the prioritized projects, and then rezone provide options into those priorities. Yes, ma'am.
I did not look ahead, but this actually goes back to the question I had about the philosophy on magnet. And you said grade structure, zoning, then magnet. And I get that with choice, but I mean, I have to say, I don't want to hear us assume that Spring Hill is going to be a regular high school. I think we should have a discussion about that, and we should look at what it's doing for our district. I mean, it's a very special school. It's very unique, and I think I'm concerned that that there's a segment of students that school serves very well that would not necessarily thrive in a typical high school. And I realize it's the least expensive option, and I'm the money person saying that, but I just really don't want to take that off the table without a discussion about not just Spring Hill as a magnet, but even the elementary schools and middle and that whole thing. I just don't think that a lot of work and energy and went into building Spring Hill, making Spring Hill what it is. I'd like to see us talk about it before we assume it should be a regular high school.
And that's one of the reasons we strongly propose kind of allowing them to come up with that program in the proposed Spring Hill Middle plan, because of where we are. There's so much in which family, you think about how many, our choice night, our magnet fairs, and how many families participate in that, the hard work that these magnet schools have done to create that. We believe that with this format, that we can strengthen those options, but also serve and continue that choice. It's just a part of the educational menu today. So we would like to see it work here, and I think to Ms. Hines' point is just being very deliberate about not overcrowding Chapin High School with a sustainable model here. So I support that in the conversation. What Spring Hill and all of our magnets provide, because it allows movement everywhere. And each one of our magnet schools receives interest. So that just shows we have something that the public likes. And as we do that based rezoning, it will be based on residency. And then that's why I say that comes first. And then choice and magnet allows us to look at, okay, how much room do we have for this choice program or this magnet program? Yes.
I just want to marinate on this for a second. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And second, what you just said about Spring Hill fully. So I strongly support that.
And I'm not trying to contradict, but I'll throw my experience in there. I was the magnet person. I attended the conference up in Connecticut not long ago when Dr. Hefner was taking us through this process. A true magnet school is one in which transportation is provided and made available for all students. Mr. Wiseman, I know you're no longer the transportation guy. Do we provide transportation for these students?
Yes, sir, we do. We basically shuttle them into their home school, what we call the Irma High School, and then we
Okay.
shuttle them up to the Spring Hill.
Okay, well, good. I just wanted to that's something, again, sometimes we tend to think that everybody has equal access and equal resources and all that, so, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I guess I'm just, kind of tying it all in too, but when we're talking about the futures for kind of like the Crossroads building and the Chapin Intermediate School building, and I'm just kind of looking at the numbers here, and obviously they would be sure to change based off of some of this like redistricting, like with the Harbison West splitting it in half, so some of these population numbers would change at the schools, but like I'm looking at like Piney Woods and Chapin Elementary, which is on this first one that would then go to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the current building of Chapin Intermediate School, right? And I'm looking at kind of the numbers of Chapin Intermediate right now, which they're at like 920 based off of this 90-day. But then if you were to add the current, I guess, kids coming from both, would it be adding more to what the school is already kind of at capacity, or too many kids, because there's so many kids coming, and same with Harbison West and Leapart and Seven Oaks. And the building of Crossroads itself, would it be able to handle that uptick in possible future kids?
Great point. We've done some I would say preliminary. I don't want to put Dr. Harris on the spot with this. We do recognize there's going to be some need for Crossroad core spaces to turn it into a middle school. In our last kind of review, we were thinking about wings at Dutch Fork Middle and Irmo Middle. So you will see kind of that notion. In order to make this work, like we were saying, we'll present you what it looks like, what we have, and it's going to be tight or might not work. But we'll say, what does a wing at Lake Murray look like? Instead of a 6th grade academy at Dutch Fork Middle, what if we put this into Crossroads to make it work? So we want to provide those plans, because you're right, there's going to be some upgrade needs at Crossroads.
And I guess that just, when we're talking about prioritizing because so many buildings need so many things, and which building to get what, maybe that's just me kind of bounce it off when you come to the intermediate schools and those buildings. If we're going to have an uptick and we're going to combine them into 6th, 7th, and 8th, as opposed to 6th and 7th or just 6th grade, maybe looking at where the priorities go for those, because they're going to need that additional kind of space down the line.
And I think that goes back to Mr. Hogan's point about waiting, right? Once we have, this is a equation with four huge components or variables, and how do we weight these variables when we look at it? Life safety, easy, right? But then wing here versus magnet there, that's where that's where we're going to need this philosophy. So what I felt like, if we adopt the structure and then provide options of moving into the structure, then we know that, okay, this is the goal we're trying to achieve. Now we're going to give a higher weight to what gets us to this model. And that's why we would weight that more than something else on the list, because we're trying to get to this particular model.
I had one more question, Mr. Ross, Dr. Ross, excuse me. The district-wide the district-wide programs, any idea where the placement of these programs will go?
Yes, we do. So we have what the administration is going to recommend to you. And so what the administration would recommend is that the Academy for Success has to leave Spring Hill in order for this model to work. Adult ed would have to leave Irmo High School. We're going to be talking about that tonight and what the new Irmo High School is going to look like. And the 5 program has to leave Piney Woods. We need every classroom at Piney Woods in order to make this work. So we would like to consolidate Academy for Success, Adult Ed, and 5 in the current Dutch Fork Elementary building. And so that makes the Dutch Fork Elementary students homeless. And so we would like to recommend building a new Dutch Fork Elementary. So that's how that's going to work. And then, of course, the center would stay right here operating as is.
Well, how about until, and I'm assuming that are you saying that building project would be separate from the
It would be in
referendum?
it would be in the referendum
Well, but you wanted to do this prior to the referendum, make these moves. Where do you think you would house them then?
I don't see, to be honest with you, how this would work.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying to figure.
And I'll tell you that, and that's why, Ms. Hines' point is well took. I think, when we started this conversation, we had thoughts about a 22 referendum, but we did not have this conversation, right? And so the more we think about it, I'm doubting if a 23 referendum is enough time. So just like we are with Chapin High School, we're going to have some intermediate steps. Might be portables at Chapin High School because we're just not in time to get that decision on the ground before full implementation. So that's something I want to go back and continue to work on. I will need, we'll see tonight, to go from a conceptual to actual construction documents has been like a 9-month process. So it's a long process with third-party estimators, and so we're going to need help to. I don't want to say one thing in terms of implementation without having at least a third-party estimator help us put some timelines together.
Well, with all of that kind of being said, and one of my concerns that I have about this, I see that, going back, we need to agree on the proposed grade structure, and then we need to agree on a rezoning or redistricting plan, and then comes the bond referendum, right? So, and then you just made another comment that I've also had a little bit of a concern about, there's going to be some growing pains to all of this, so maybe we have to get portables at Chapin High School. Well, one of the things that I think about is, I think the whole board received concerns from Lake Murray about the portables that were implemented in 2004, and I'm sure a similar conversation happened in 2004 of this is going to be a temporary plan, and then we're going to alleviate the overcrowding. And what I want to make sure that we do is, it seems like there's been a lot of waste with different studies, and you have different boards that come in, and you have different like unexpected events like COVID, you have growth, you have all kinds of factors everything is continuously moving along, and that's just how life is, right? Everything will change, but as we agree to a proposed grade structure and we agree to redistricting, that we start implementing as we go. It's not that, I am very much against a rushed plan. It makes me very uneasy, but we have to have that community buy-in as we start the redistricting process and we start the conversations about how we fund the additional schools. So when you say that, the district-wide programs, 3 of them would be in the Dutch Fork Elementary School, which would mean that we would need to implement, or we would need to build a brand-new elementary school. If we agree to that right now and say we're going to redistrict, and Dutch Fork and a bond referendum doesn't pass, what happens if a bond doesn't pass? Because we've already agreed to it, we've already said we're doing it, people are already making decisions for their families. So I think that's just one of the, I don't know that it's a question, it's more of just like an observation that we need to make sure that we have that community buy-in to this plan. I like this proposed grade structure, and I like the way that these schools seem to flesh out. But what I don't like is not knowing, to me, it just rip the Band-Aid off, have a few uncomfortable years, and and that makes people understand, hey, we have some facility needs that need to happen so that we don't have a situation like Lake Murray being in portables from 2004 until 2023, and then they all have issues with that. I mean, that's not fair to anyone. And then you have the schools in Irmo that, you know, they saw this report and they thought, man, we're going to have new elementary schools. And because there were several that were identified as you need to tear it down. So those are just things that keep me up at night.
Yeah, and I just to emphasize or validate what Ms. Hines is saying, and that is that I went through the process at Chapin High School when it said on the referendum, and there is a faction of our community that, you know, thinks that nobody's spending their money wisely, and they sort of arch their backs. But I think the thing that helped was doing a really good job, I don't want to say PR-wise, but having those open forums, having those opportunities of workshops in public like we're doing now, and explaining and helping them help us go through the process. But I did have a question again, getting back to the academy and adult stuff. I didn't see the numbers for the Cates Center. Is there enrollment such that we could possibly utilize space there while we're going through this?
We can look into it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a.
Well, yeah. I think if I'm judging right, I think, you know, some programs we may be able to do it, and some, and not to disparage the setup type for, let's say, the Academy for Success. Movement of students, access to facilities, lunch, having art class. Some of those would take a little something that we need to figure out, because that's almost a separate school type.
I know,
Yeah.
and I know you have to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Bag lunches may be. Bag lunches. I'm just,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I think that it's kind of like your plan of saying, well, let's come up with a structure, and then
And then
let's
move
kind of
to
work
it.
our way through it.
Amen. Yeah.
But as many as looking at all the adjustments and having lived through them over the years, I can tell you we've done a lot of different things in order to accommodate, especially if it's not for the long run, if it's something for the short run.
And I think that's to that point of coming up with implementation options, is that we're going to look at all spaces available in order to get to whatever is approved. So that's a good point. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of back to Ms. Hines' question, I was just wondering, could you guys, like, is there a way to do this sooner than later and assuming no bond referendum, just so we can deal with the fact that we do have such different grade structures? And then kind of like a plan A and a plan B. This is plan A if there is no bond referendum, and we would have to add portables, we would have to do this, we would have to do that. And plan B is if we had a bond referendum, this is what it would look like, which might be further change. Maybe it's building a wing here or a wing there, but I'm kind of a rip the Band-Aid off person myself too, and I think people actually deal with that better than a lot of uncertainty. And one last point I'll just make. I have a little bit of concern with using the Ballantyne building for the Chapin cluster, and that in a way I feel like you might be making overcrowding worse because you're adding another elementary school that those kids will come up through. So I can see it if you had a building put them in, but I'm kind of worried that under the current, we don't have but one high school, that we would actually exacerbate that problem.
So, great point. I want to make a clarification. So I would be taking these three populations. Oh, I can't. I'm going to be taking these three current populations and spread them over 4 buildings. we're going to take this current population at Ballantyne and spread it over these buildings. So that's a great clarification.
Utilizing Ballantyne to alleviate the overcrowding of Lake Murray Elementary.
Amen.
And there'll still
Chapin.
there'll
Yeah.
still be some Ballantyne students that stay where they are,
Still be
depending
some
on where they
Ballantyne,
are.
that's correct.
And earlier, when we talked about, I know when we first talked about, redistricting, there was the conversation about how the Ballantyne kids would be impacted on where they went to high school, but we're starting it now at the elementary school level instead of later on after the Ballantyne level. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'll make those corrections in future presentations. I think that's important because it does look like the current Ballantyne kids, but this will be taking these 3 existing populations and spreading over 4 buildings.
And then kind of going back to this conversation about when we actually implement this exact or this particular model and how, when we start, sending kids to actual buildings and implementing that, and doing that before a potential bond referendum, is it also helps the community. I mean, this is all so speculative. You don't really know. People don't know what the buildings are. They don't know what the schools are, what the problems are. They don't, this is, it's theory. It's a theory issue. So, if you have your kids in a school and you see where the problems are, you're going to be more likely to support making it, you understand where the issues are, and you're more likely to support the long-term concept of what needs are being met and what needs are not being met based off of this model. So if you wait until, it helps the money gets spent the right way at the right time, and projects don't sit in the queue for a few years and ground doesn't get broken. That's just kind of my thoughts. Kimberly, Matt, do y'all have anything? I keep looking this way, so just yell. Okay. Go ahead, Ms.
All right, so we're going to move on, talking about meeting needs. I wanted to, and this is a lot of information, I want to have Dr. Harris kind of explain when we look at the use of the building, that sometimes we use head counts, but there's so much more to the story. So, Dr. Harris, can you share what we're looking at here?
Okay, absolutely. Perhaps you've seen the ADM, unlike enrollment, where we're taking a snapshot on a given day and taking a look at and consider those students who are funded and or not funded, regardless of funding source. This ADM is our final 45th day ADM. And it gives us, I think the idea here is that it's not a one-for-one as it is with enrollment. There are further considerations that I actually heard in your conversations already as it relates to students and how students are counted and weighted. And as you can see, there on the left-hand side, different considerations that have to be taken into account as it relates to funding, as well as, in particular this conversation, the impact on how and where we serve students. And I think that's really the idea here. And the reason we wanted to share this, just as a reminder to you and differentiate that from that of enrollment. Enrollment, again, is that head count, but this, of course, gives us an actual formula that we would have to follow, and that in particular, Paul in particular has to take into consideration of the number of funded students times these weightings divided by the number of days that, in this particular case, that we have here, the 45 days. So a lot to consider, not exactly a one-to-one exchange, but further consideration that give us pause to look at how we serve students and actually where we serve the students.
So what this allows us to do is to see that not every student, every number is the same. There's multiple different categories that does drive our funding, and that's because the state is saying that you need additional resources for this particular child. So if you go into a classroom serving students with high needs, you'll see more resources being deployed there. So as we talk about the building needs, we have to include these programmatic needs here. So this just kind of gives you an idea of how our funding is laid out. But what we are working on now is going back to that discussion on magnet and choice and what education will look like in 5 years from now. Have Ms. McCaskill to come forward. Let's talk about what academics and administration is doing to address this question. Ms. McCaskill.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Just like Dr. Harris was just saying, with the EFA codes, we've got to be careful with looking at the number of students in a building, because your special ed students are going to need much smaller classes. They're going to need different size classrooms. They're going to need changing tables, lots of different pieces and parts that they're going to need in those classrooms. Your kindergarten classrooms are going to be much more, a bigger classroom size. Your primary classes are going to need restrooms in them. If we think about the next 5 years and we think about the profile of the South Carolina graduate, we're going to need collaboration spaces for students. You're not just going to need 25 desks seated in a classroom. You're going to need places where kids can do project-based learning. They're going to need expanded spaces for that collaboration. So there's a lot of different pieces and parts. If you really think about Piney Woods, the way it was built, there was a lot of vision in that school of what those pieces and parts would be. So there's a lot of spaces there that can be used for multiple pieces of instruction. And so when we think about our older buildings, that's not there. And so those are the kinds of facilities that we're going to need. Science labs, we're going to need STEAM labs. Our magnet schools, they have specific, focuses that they're going to need to have areas that are going to be able to meet the needs of those programs. So that's just kind of a general overview.
Well stated, and the reason that we wanted to give that overview, as Mr. McCaskill laid out very well, is that we look at our traditional model of school occupancy. We have to make sure that we can plan for those, as Ms. McCaskill said, extended spaces and collaboration spaces. If you look at the footprint of Dutch Fork Elementary School and look at the footprint of Piney Woods, you're doing two different things. It is drastically different. And so if I take just kind of a base hallway of 2 classrooms, boys' restroom, girls' restroom, and you have 10 classrooms, 80% school capacity is and I'm using the word lecture. We know just hearing from that there's big collaboration spaces, but a teacher-assigned classroom. We would like to have no more than 80% of those rooms designed for a teacher-assigned classroom. And then 20% of that building to be used for these collaborative spaces. If you go up to 100% of teacher-assigned classrooms, you miss those opportunities. And what we're now seeing is with the needs of students, we're seeing sensory rooms in buildings now. And a sensory room is a place where a child has what we call tough feelings. How do you calm them down without safely? And a sensory room, has a lot of different manipulatives. The color is set up. And there might be things in there you can throw, but if that's the weighted blankets, there's a whole science behind this. I was at a school that asked for 2. So we need a sensory room on this end of the hall and this end of the hall. So we're just seeing, as Ms. McCaskill says, as our needs change over time, how do we design these buildings to meet these needs? I did not know how something like Adderall shortage could impact just the daily operations of a school. But that's a reality in which we're dealing with. And I think what Dr. Harris and Ms. McCaskill were saying in their day-to-day walk is that if we think we're building buildings where we're just going to put everyone in nice rows of 25, those days are not with us anymore. So we want to in our plan, have that 20% of that space. I've seen in Beaufort, they don't have a policy on it, but the board did make like sort of a resolution, an agreement that we're going to build with this kind of capacity structure. And that allows, that lab may be a STEAM one year, it might be a STEM the next year. It could change based on the programmatic needs. So, you know, this is kind of that same hallway with a 90% piece. We feel you start losing those programs, those choice programs. Every school delivers the core. But one thing about our choice programs and what you see at Spring Hills, it's those extras that draw people in. And then we have just some regulatory issues. For instance, if you have our board policy 1 to 25, 1 to 25 in high school, 22 in elementary. 4th grade. So we may divide by 25 and 22 of regular ed students, but of ED students, you're divided by 12. Of some of our high needs students, you're doing 9. And then of our Title I, the divisible is by 18. So where that building is, to your point, in the high poverty area, its capacity and the amount of teachers and resources we have, we're divided by 18 and 12 per class because of the needs that we face there. And so these are just all considerations that we want to talk about and just kind of front load in these conversations, because based on what the community provides us, we're going to have to respond to that. And it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be, hey, we're just divided by 25 and that's how many teachers we get.
Mr. Ross, let me just add one thing just to further prove your point. Again, being a building principal, I've been through the retrofitting and going back and having to add when we didn't anticipate certain things. I don't say we, I wasn't there then, but yeah, it's hard to anticipate some of those things. And that's cost the district a lot of money when you don't sort of, if you think that you need to plan for the here and now and not what is possibly down the road. When we designed Chapin High School, it had 10 extra classrooms in it. It's that capacity. If we hadn't done that, we'd have portables all over the place out there right now. So, that's something that, when we get to that point, we certainly want to be forward thinking. And the other thing is, just like if you change something in your home, OSF, their new codes and their regulations are different from, what's at Harbison West Elementary School. We couldn't even build that school nowadays with their changes and their regulations. So those are, perhaps having somebody and that should be part of the study. I'm guessing you've already thought through that, I'm sure. But that's also a consideration, even when we go through the process of shuffling the kids around, things like that. So.
Just real quick, I'm going to give us the 12-minute notice until 6 o'clock before we start our regularly scheduled board meeting. But this is just the first conversation of many like this. So we obviously, I think we didn't anticipate getting through everything tonight, but so if we don't, that's absolutely okay. We're going to build upon that. That's why they prepared these nifty little binders. We can add to it as we go. And I just wanted to kind of give a heads up on where we were on time, because, we could be here all night just talking about this. But I know we have some other things as well. So go ahead.
All right. Yes, ma'am. So what we will end up coming back to this group with is we're going to be proposing desired student enrollments, kind of a range. We have not had that completed yet, but we're in the process of doing that. We will talk about our desired utilization rates. And all of this matters, so just wanted to kind of give a primer on that. And why is all this important? Well, I talked about the multiple barriers in order to come up with the facilities master plan. And so included is community analysis. We just got more detail about the Broad River Road widening project. It's starting in 7 months.
They called and said they're going to try to get it started in 7 months, but it'd probably be more likely than 10.
Okay. So that's going to change. I think we should be aware of what's happening in Irmo with the Lower Saluda Greenway and making sure that our plans consider those kind of dynamics, because that's going to be important. Our facility needs assessment, enrollment projections, and instructional plan review. In each of these, we need to kind of determine which ones are we going to weight the most there. So in terms of implementation, we've have the solicitation for the facilities master plan. We are hoping to bring that back either on the 27th or the first meeting in March to approve that group. I feel that once we've had a chance, once the board approves that firm and we onboard them, we have this conversation again with them in the room, and so that they can give their feedback. But it won't be our first time with this material. And then we would like to do a March bond resolution workshop. This bond resolution is our annual maintenance, so this is not the referendum. It's our annual maintenance. But there may be some, if we want to start now, some on certain projects, we can look at putting that in this year's capital budget. We had on here the August 15th bond question. As we talk about this and kind of plan it out, I don't know if we're going to be ready for that, so I'll remove that. But it will allow us to have all of this time to have that cue and feedback from the community. And then to the point that we all are looking at when Chapin exceeds building capacity. So we need to start planning now for what fall 23 looks like. They tell me they can make it next year, but we definitely know fall 24, we have to have these in place. So the last thing, and I'm going to give our CFO, Ms. Paul, 7 minutes to go through this slide. But we wanted to talk about some funding options available to us. So, Ms. Paul?
Thank you, Dr. Ross. So as he mentioned, we do plan to have a full workshop just on bonds coming up in March. That will be with our bond counsel, Franny Hauser, and then with our financial advisor, Jay Glover. So that's planned for March 13th right now. But as part of this discussion, we did want to bring some options for y'all. Again, we do not have true numbers at this point. This is just, what are we looking at if we don't have a tax increase to our debt service millage, and we do go for a question in fall of 23. So this would be a bond referendum going to vote fall of 23. We would keep our millage at 69.5 mils, and this would result in roughly $180 million that we're able to pass with the bond referendum. This will be in 3 different installments of about $60 million each. So you can tell from this graph, if you pay attention to really just the line, that's our millage, that's the 69.5 mils, and that's what we will be able to collect. If you look at the bars, you'll see that in 2033, we're actually starting to have a little bit of excess there. But unfortunately, because we have such tight areas in these early years, the maximum capacity that we would have at that time would still be 180 million. We also asked our bond counsel, our financial advisor, to look at, an increase of 10 mils. So this would increase our millage to 79.5 mils in 2025. And again, this is still a fall 23 bond referendum. Just for, on average, a 10 mil increase for our average taxpayer, our owner-occupied taxpayer, would be about $60 for a $150,000 assessed value property. But again, if you look at this, for a 10 mil increase, that would actually get us around 280 million. And again, three separate installments, 2 of 90 million and 1 of 100 million. But you'll see here again with this with this line going across, there's no more capacity. I mean, that is truly maxing out what we can get with that increase of 10 mills. This next slide looks at a fall 2024 bond referendum, and again, no tax increase. So this would keep our millage at 69.5 mills, and we would able to increase that capacity to 194 million for the bond referendum. You know, just extending that one more year really does help us, because in the early years, this is where we're really tight on our capacity. Again, you can see that we have a little bit of excess capacity in 2038 and 2039, but again, because we're tighter in these early years, our referendum number would be 194. And then lastly, if we look at a fall 2024 bond referendum, again, 10 mil increase, we would be able to get around 282 million. Again, it's issued in 3 different installments, 2 installments of 90 million and 1 of 102. So these are just really just kind of graphs for y'all to take in. I know there's probably tons of questions about bond referendums, but here this is just kind of showing what we potentially could do with the capacity that we have right now.
Madam Chair, that concludes our presentation, and we stand for any questions.
Do we have any last-minute questions for Dr. Ross or his team? Mr. Scully, microphone, please.
Do these numbers,
I'm getting the look.
as far as the debt service millage and capacity, does that take into consideration any, and we may not have any potential existing debts that are sunsetting along this timeline?
Yes, so this does, if you can tell kind of in the legend at the bottom, so it includes all of our existing debt, and then it also includes, you know, our plan, like you mentioned before, we always issue about 15 million in our maintenance debt, so it includes those issuances as well. And then also the Irmo High School plan. So you can see here, and I know you're new, but for Irmo High School, the GEO Series 2022, that's 8% debt at 34 million. That was really the first tranche for Irmo High School, but we knew that would not get us all the way to the new Irmo wing. So the plan then became in 2023, so the yellow bar will issue another 9 million. And then in 2024, we have the capacity to issue another 17 million for Irmo High School. So that's including everything that we know at this time.
All right, anything else? All right, hearing none, I will adjourn and we will restart our regularly scheduled meeting in 3 minutes.